Thank you, everyone, for participating in this webinar with us today, the presenters as well as other participants in the audience. This is the second webinar of the In-Situ project, which is its long name is Place-Based Innovation of Cultural and Creative Industries in non-urban areas. I'm Nancy Duxbury. I'm a researcher at the Centre for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra and the coordinator of this project. This webinar series has been designed to bring together different representatives from different projects and organizations and research areas that relate to the work of In Situ, and also to compare what we've all learned, what the ongoing issues are, so that we are informed about what each other is doing and other initiatives as we go forward to try to find formula to make non-urban based cultural and creative organizations more viable, more thriving, and develop a more, I guess, supportive cultural policy and programming framework for program framework for their work. So today's, the first webinar was held in September. It focused on the individual organizations and what enabled them to be viable. And the second, in non-urban areas, the second webinar focuses on the question, how can cultural and creative industry innovation ecosystems be fostered in non-urban areas? And with this focus, it's really looking at those interconnections between the organizations and individuals and how to build up a larger system that can help support and enable this work to be fostered. The third, just as a note, the third webinar will be held the 5th of December, and it's more looking at the impacts of cultural and creative work on the sustainability and vibrancy of communities in non-urban areas. So again, welcome and thank you for being here with us today. The In Situ project is a European-wide project that's funded by Horizon Europe. And we are very thrilled to be able to offer this webinar series and others as we work forward to help bring voices together in support of cultural and creative industries and other activities, creative activities in non-urban areas, and to discuss together how best to enable this to be a viable creative vitality in non-urban areas become a reality. Our planned host, Carolina, was unfortunately ill today, so she's not able to join us, but we have all of our other speakers here with us today, so we'll carry forward. And we wish her the best in recovery. To let you know, let's see the outline. We'll have a quick introduction of our speakers, and then we're going to, of our guests, and we're going to allow them each to present secondly, for about 10 minutes each, about their reflections and their input on this overarching question and things and their insights from their work. After each presentation, we're going to allow about 15 minutes for any immediate questions that may occur to you. And after all of that also includes the presenters who may have other questions for each other. And after all of that, there's about 25 minutes for a general discussion on other topics that may not have come up to date or other input from other participants. And Lorena, where's Lorena? Lorena will be trolling through the chat during this event, looking for your questions and comments to bring them forward, and otherwise activating you to ask questions during these different periods of time during the event. And I guess the final thing is we tried to make this more like a meeting format so that everyone sees everyone else who's in it. It is being recorded so that we have a record of all the lovely insights that you offer. But we really encourage you to all participate during this time. And thank you again for being here. Next, let's see. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to our guests to give a brief, like 3-minute introduction of yourself and, if relevant, the project that you are going to be talking about in a few minutes more. So I'll just start in the order that I have the presentation. So it'll Claudia De Luca from the University of Bologna, who will be presenting about the RURITAGE project, Heritage for Rural Revitalization, which I know also includes considerations about innovation ecosystems. Claudia?
Hello, can you hear me right?
Yes. Now this is just the brief 3-minute "Who are you?" introduction.
Sorry,
That's
sorry.
okay. That's okay. We'll do that first, and then we'll get you into your full presentation so people know who you are before you present.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Nancy, for the introduction, and thanks to the whole in situ project for hosting us and for inviting us for this. I mean, as just said, I'm Claudia Luca. I'm a so-called junior assistant professor at the University of Bologna. Meaning that I'm doing both research and teaching. I work in the planning and regeneration group. So we work around planning in general. I mean, with the part is actually more from urban planning. And then, I mean, since RURITAGE, I would say, so since 2015, we moved very much our attention also towards rural areas or non-urban. I mean, there would be quite some time just to understand the definition around it. In RURITAGE, we speak about rural areas. And in this sense, yeah, we work very much both, like, let's say, within European project, but also in national funded project around, let's say, revitalization of rural areas. And of course, culture is one of the main drivers that we study and use there. Sometimes, but this will be clear also then in the presentation, I don't really refer to cultural and creative industries, but much more to a wider ecosystem where it's not just industries. I mean, also because being a planner at the very end, we'll try, and that's what we did in RURITAGE. So we tried to develop recommendations for policy and decision makers. So let's say to be able to nurture a wider ecosystem that goes also a bit beyond industries, maybe. That's it. I mean, myself, I'm coming from an environmental science background, so I'm not really into the social part, let's say. And I'm working very much also on, let's say, climate-related issue. So also related somehow with culture, but yeah, more general to say about how to create adaptive climate-proof communities somehow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the quick introduction. Louise Weir from the University of Galway, who will be presenting in the next round on the FLIARA project, Female-Led Innovation in Agriculture and Rural Areas project.
Hi, Nancy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to participate. We were delighted. And yes, I am Louise Weir. I'm in the University of Galway, based here in Ireland. And I want to send apologies from my colleague, Associate Professor Maura Farrell, who's actually leading our project, but had a prior engagement before she got this invitation. So she sends her apologies for that. Where I am based here in Galway, I'm in the Geography Department and also in the Rural Studies Centre. And much like Claudia, we're kind of across all things rural. We span from rural regeneration to spatial injustices. We have national point contacts where we are in the National Rural Study Centre. We do social farming, we're involved in the EIPs, but also a lot of European projects. One just finished, Ruralisation. We're also involved in the Imagine project. We span a lot. We're a small little group, but we like to do a lot, mostly all rooted in the passion for rural. So I think we're well placed to be here today. My own hat, I wear quite a few. I have professional planning, spatial planning background, and then went back into academia with a lot of research in rural regeneration, rural planning, social inclusion, exclusion. And we're also involved in other Horizon projects at the moment, Horizon EU projects, the Premier project, which is a multi-actor project, which is, very important for us to also get the voice of those who aren't in it. So I think that aligns very well to this project as well when we talk about innovation and who's in that ecosystem, and more importantly, sometimes who's not in that innovation ecosystem. So that's kind of my brief background, and thank you for inviting me to speak, and I'll tell you all about FLIARA in a few moments.
Thank you very much. Milene Tessarin is a researcher at Utrecht University and is working within the In Situ project. So Milene.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. As Nancy told, my name is Milene Tessarin. I work here at the Utrecht University in the Economic Geography department. Here we work a lot with innovation studies, and also my particular research is about the labor market and the role of workers in promote innovation, also to how they adapted to changes, like the recent change in the due to new technologies on the labor market. So it's very related with the idea of the in situ project, also to analyze the impacts of this special group of workers, the creative workers in the European Union. Also, as Nancy told, we are part of the in situ project. So we are one of the presentation I will make here is one of the works that we have done within the group. And here we work with it's myself, Carolina Castaldi, Nicola Cortinovs, and Ron Boskma. So we will try to bring this a more quantitative approach to the presentation, as is usual the work that we work here. So I think I will talk more about the work soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, Tim Wojan from the National Science Foundation in the United States, who's also a member of the International Advisory Board for the In Situ Project. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Nancy, and thank you for the invitation. I am a established scientist fellow, an ORISE established scientist fellow within the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics within the National Science Foundation, and ORISE stands for Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education. And the important thing to understand is that as a fellow, I'm actually not a federal employee. I have a developmental fellowship, which is really nice because of that. What that allows me to do is explore sort of areas that the institute, the center has not been able to investigate. And one of those areas is particularly non-technological innovation. And what I'll be talking about today is design. Previously, my experience in this area, I had been at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service, where I studied rural innovation, rural arts, and rural design. And going even farther back, I was an administrator with the OECD in their Territorial Reviews division, and worked on the Territorial Review of Siena. So I have some experience with the European context as well. But I'll be talking more about the possible role of design and how that fits with cultural and creative industries and innovation a little later.
Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, Horacio Nagalish, who is the Executive Director, I believe that's your title, of the EMES Network on Social Innovation and Social Enterprise.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Really, it's a pleasure for us to be here. Plus, EMES, it's actually an outreach partner of the In Situ project. So, you know, it's really a delight for us to be here. So very shortly, just picking up on what you said, for us, our entry point to many of the questions that are raised in situ and in this webinar are actually social enterprises. We have been studying social enterprises and their ecosystems for over 20 years. EMES was actually the pioneering network here in Europe, and then in 2013 we expanded, and we became international with a very intensive dialogue with other networks and communities of researchers. So slowly, actually, the one of the main field of interest of research for EMES from the social enterprise perspective was not culture and the arts or the rural, even the rural, although some of our members were based in rural areas. But I would say that in the last 10 years, I mean, I personally have done my research in that area. And in the past 10 years, I would say, and in the past 5 years, it has become very, very much a focus of our research network. We are really seeing how at the crossroads of culture and the arts, economic plurality, let's call it like that, and also the activation and the participation of communities. There's a huge and very interesting field of interest, and particularly where we're seeing this community culture that is sustainable and that also looks at ecological issues, like Claudia was saying. very often is taking place in rural areas. So that's why we're really looking at this, multiple dimension area. And this is why it's a delight for me personally to be here as a researcher, but also representing IMES. And I will try and approach the question from the social enterprise ecosystem.
You. This promises to be very rich. I'm looking forward to other presentations, and people can start putting their questions and comments as we go. So to begin, Claudia, and I'll put my little phone on for 10 minutes so I don't have to say stop, but approximately there. Okay.
Now I can share it, no?
Sorry for doing this, but it's all part of it. Okay.
Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Give me a sec to go back to the previous. Okay. So thank you very much again for this. Yeah, I was rushing a bit before into the presentation already, because I mean, I think the presentation itself can very much respond also not to some of the questions that maybe have been raised also in the introduction, and I mean the other speakers already touched upon. As said, I'm gonna speak about RURITAGE, not RURITAGE in general, let's say, because I mean it has been quite of a big and complicated project, but really like to the approach we had to this innovation ecosystem in non-urban areas. Just to give you an idea of what I'm speaking about, RURITAGE was, because it ended last year actually, an Horizon 2020 project that was led by us, so by our research group, that is led by Professor Tondelli, that also couldn't join today, and run for 45 months. It was supposed, yeah, I mean to last a bit less, but because of COVID, as you can imagine, I mean it's we asked for a bit of an extension. The full budget was around 10 million, so it was quite of a big project. And apart from that, the thing that is always very hard to explain is that it was made by 38 project partners. We were not happy enough, so we opened 2 open calls during the project, and we got additional, let's say 19 additional partners somehow with diverse role, and 38 partners that joined us just digitally. So it was a huge community, and it still is, because I mean, after the project that we decided to set up a network that is still running. So there are still some activities that we are carrying on. The aim was, and it was a very peculiar call, I have to say, and also always made RURITAGE in a very much at the edge of 2 DGs in terms of the commission. So we were in between of DG Agri, actually, because we were working with rural development, but then very much in contact also with the cultural one and the one that is working with research. So we were always like the only project in the heritage call, because we have been funded by an heritage call, actually, that was speaking about rural areas. So it was very hard, because every time we had to relate with our so-called sister projects, we were working with projects that were working in urban areas. And as you can imagine, I mean, the ecosystems were quite different there. So it was not always easy to exchange, let's say. But because again, like the aim, the call was asking for a paradigm, let's say, of heritage-led rural development. So we somehow decided to work over various so-called systemic innovation areas. There are the 6 lines that you see in this image here. That were going, I would say, much beyond the 2 main drivers that we always speak about when we speak about rural, that are on the one side agriculture, if we speak about enterprises, and on the other side, if we speak about, let's say heritage-based, is very much about tourism. And we didn't want to focus just on that. So I mean, as you will see in this image, of course, I mean, there are some like pilgrimage and rural food, for example. There are 2 lines that are very much, I mean, in relation, let's say, with tourism on the one side, and on the agriculture on the other side. But then we have these other 4 lines that are migration, art and festival, resilience, and landscape management, that touch upon very diverse, I would say, drivers, some that were not that much faced maybe in rural areas at the moment. The idea of migration raised actually from a very good practice that came from Italy, where basically a completely empty helmet in a very rural area, actually on a mountain area, was given back. So I mean, let's say that the home were assigned to migrants, to refugees actually, and that was somehow, I mean, intentionally made for repopulating the place. It's a very interesting experience to study, and we wanted from there to develop, I mean, this line. Art and Festival goes very much into cultural and creative, I would say. So it's everything that is happening in rural related with art and festival, music festival, art festival, film festival, I mean, various one. Resilience touch upon the idea of making disaster as actually elements of possible recovery. So we work, for example, with a case study that made a museum over earthquakes because it was very much, let's say, touched upon by an earthquake, and they decided to make it like as a learning process and a community learning process and build up a museum over it. And landscape management, of course, goes, I mean, and touch upon all the previous one. Where did we do it? We had, let's say, 6 plus 12 case studies. What does it mean, 6 plus 12? Because it was a role model and replicator model, meaning that we have 12 good practices, so case studies that already developed model of heritage-led regeneration. And then we have 6 so-called replicators, meaning case studies that during the project itself developed their own heritage-based plan to regenerate themselves, or let's say sustainably develop. The technical partners supported these case studies, of course, in a so-called multi-level knowledge transfer. So I mean, we had we were lucky enough to meet quite some time before COVID came. And then, as you can see, I mean, in the last workshop, I mean, we went online as everybody else, but that created, I mean, I think the precondition to set up a very successful work then. And this approach, this knowledge transfer approach, was then somehow implemented in the case studies themselves, that set up this multi-stakeholder approach at local scale, where the coordinator of the multi-stakeholder approach was the same partner that was discussing with the other partners. So let's say bringing back the innovation and the knowledge from the consortium to the local stakeholders. We, of course, I mean, worked with policy research, industry services, investor, public, and the users. And the idea was to co-develop together with them this plan that they had to implement. To us, definitely, and even more in rural areas, I would say innovation happens in places, meaning in physical spaces where people meet. I mean, the pictures that you can see here somehow represents the diversity also of the heritage and of the places that we were working with, because you can see the buildings, how much they differ, so also in terms of architecture, basically. And what they did in these places was to meet people. So to us, again, innovation is community-driven. So it came out from a participatory process. Again, here you can see some moments of these events taking place in our role models and replicators. This phase of multi-stakeholder participation and co-development led the replicators, so the 6 case studies, to develop their own regeneration plans that you can find online in the RURITAGE website, and that included many actions that touch upon the 6 drivers I was showing you before. So pilgrimage, migration, art and festival, I mean, all the 6 lines that I showed you before. Here you have some example of implementation. The first one is it's an exhibition that took place in Slovenia in one of the case studies that we have. The second one is a pilgrimage that they restored within the project, and then they organized, like, for example, as in the picture, as you see, like walks with children and schools. And the last one is about, she's an Iranian migrant that was hosted in Germany and that did an internship in an art forest trade school that was somehow also funded during the project. Some of the results we have is like, quite much about pilgrimage. So, I mean, kilometer of route improved, building with improved accessibility, events, many events about the support, the inclusion of migrants, accessibility in terms of digital and Wi-Fi. Of course, I mean, consider that we were during COVID. So, I mean, that was definitely an issue for many of us. Festival and art exhibition. But then, I mean, also, as I was telling you before, the establishment of the so-called Rural Heritage Hub, so this physical place that went much beyond the case study that we had, many people involved, many webinars, and I mean, a lot of other things. And one of the results that we are, I would say, more proud of somehow is the additional funding that we managed to leverage in the case study that we worked with. And that is because, I mean, we somehow managed to create this innovation ecosystem that then was able itself, without us anymore, to leverage funds to keep working on the action. So let's say to conclude and to give some hints also on the creative and cultural context or industry, let's say, what we see is that there is an issue of recognizing innovation in rural areas, because many times it goes much beyond TRL, so technological readiness level, and touch upon SRL, so societal or social readiness level. That is a topic that, I mean, is not very much explored yet. So it's very hard also to get funds, because if you're asked what's your TRL, and then you have a kind of a social innovation, no, it's very hard to fit somehow. The somehow dichotomy about like the very much strong link of this area with cultural and natural heritage and tradition, but at the same time, we kind of miss events for cultural attractiveness. So somehow, no, to recreate this link was something that we very much saw as a good practice. The idea of new skills and abilities, so I mean, all the training part was kind of crucial in terms of development of innovation. As I already said, that's very important for us. Innovation happens in places. I mean, doesn't mean that we always have to meet, but it's very important to have a kind of a reference point for people, because I mean, the distances are not the same that in urban areas. So it may be, and that's actually something that we're very much working upon now, that one of the issues that we see is that there are no defined border of these ecosystems, while in urban areas, very easy sometimes, no, you have the municipal border, also to do the map, no, of your stakeholder. Here, it's very hard to define the borders, because they definitely goes, I mean, an overlay different, for example, municipalities. So there is a need to build cooperation among and beyond administrative boundaries. And that's also an issue again for funding, as I was telling you before, because many times region gives money to a single municipality or to another one, and then it's very hard, no, to understand which, I mean, where these ecosystems lies. And because of this, actually, we are working now very much on this new project that somehow built very much over RURITAGE, that is called RURACTIVE. Culture and cultural innovation is one of the drivers that we're also considering it. We just started, we are a month two. But nevertheless, one of the main questions we have in this new project is really like, what are the physical and spatial boundaries of innovation ecosystems, and how much they change depending on the let's say, the sector. So an example that you see here is that, for example, like the orange area is the innovation ecosystem for agriculture in Sevilla. That is one of the case studies that we have. The red one is the innovation ecosystem in tourism that they define. The green one is about energy. So it's really about understanding which are also the different borders of different topics. And culture and cultural innovation is definitely one of those that we are now investigating in this new project. I'm sorry, I think I was a bit longer than expected. That's it.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions, burning questions at this point from anyone? No? Oh, yes. Yeah, Russell.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I really, really enjoyed the presentation. I you know, the last project that you mentioned, RURACTIVE, it just, you know, it seems very interesting to me. The question, the main research question. So what are the boundaries? What is it that you're aiming to find? You know, like why focusing on boundaries? And you know, I mean, there's just one notion, you know, that I got to learn, you know, not too long ago, which is the ecotones. You know, you as a, you know, environmentalist, you probably know. I mean, these are precisely the middle grounds between ecosystems. And I tend to think, you know, as someone interested in, of course, culture and the arts and exchanges and, you know, cross-fertilization and cross-pollination, I think that ecotones are usually more interesting, you know, so boundaries that are actually very permeable. And, you know, so I'm just wondering, and how do you define boundaries? I would be very interested in knowing how you define them. And I'm from Sevilla, by the way.
Nice to know. I mean, very happy then to include you then in the stakeholders we are working with there. No, I mean, I really much agree. And it's still, I mean, we are still developing the concept of it. Of course, it will come. Hopefully, we will get some answer at the end of the project itself. But I mean, to say where we departed from and what I've seen, there is something that I very briefly mentioned in the presentation as well. That is the issue of funding. Meaning that what we, I mean, I work very closely with an area that is in the region where I'm coming from, that is not the same where I'm living now. And I work there with an association that worked very much with some of the municipalities of a valley. So in that sense, the border will be the valley for us, no? Because I mean, it's, let's say, the 6 municipalities that are in there. And what we saw there is like that there are fundings coming from the region that consider just, let's say, villages that are below 2,500. So in that case, 2 out of 6 will be okay and the others no. There is another one that gives funds just to the mountain villages, meaning like upper than, I don't remember, 800 meter or something like that, above sea level. And that will keep in 3 municipalities out of 6 and not the 2 that I mentioned before. And then there was the recovery plan of the National Recovery Plan that gave quite some, is giving actually quite some money to rural areas. And again, there are other criteria that to get the money. So meaning that we worked very much, we started to work with them 6 years ago about a strategy, you know, for the whole valley, let's say, because I mean, it's where, for example, the public transport goes, where like the schools are in common. So to us, that was somehow, no, the boundary that we wanted to work with. And there is the river. So I mean, there is also like an ecological identity somehow. Nevertheless, when we started to look for funds to do things, every time we spent so much time to make the mayors, no, agreeing on stuff. And then going out asking for money, we noticed that, I mean, the money were, I mean, given like to very different geographical boundaries actually for other criterias. And there was, I mean, this led to a very important fragmentation in the funding themselves and in the project that they could do together. So from there, but this is, I mean, a very draft idea, let's say, we would like to understand if there is a way to redefining these borders with other criteria, definitely more flexible, that maybe are sectorial. So of course, if we're speaking about transport, it makes sense to have a regional overview of connectiveness and accessibility. Maybe if we're speaking about culture, we don't, I mean, not without maybe, probably, we definitely don't have to have, you know, like a regional overview. But I mean, there is a very, at least, I mean, in some of the area, there is a very important ecosystem, even at a village level, let's say. So that's a bit the idea. So, I mean, the idea of flexibility is definitely there. And again, as planners, and I mean, we do want every time to spatialize things. So I think there is also, I mean, that part in there. And then, of course, I mean, the idea of borders, that is a very bad word and we are trying to change it. Somehow we'll find a better way of defining them. But still, it comes very much in these terms of governance and funding instruments that, I mean, sometimes don't actually go over, I mean, let's say, don't go towards cooperation, but on the other side may create fragmentation, let's say. So that's a bit, that was the hypothesis.
Thank you. We lost your question asked.
We have a question from Rosanna. Hello, my name is Rosanna Škrgulj. I come from a very small city in Croatia, and I work in a museum, and we are very interested in the topic of the role of culture in the revitalization of rural communities. And so I am very interested in the mechanics of the projects. How many people were involved? How much money did you spend? How big were the communities? What was the response from the inhabitants of those areas? So if you could just tell me a few words about it.
Okay, can I just interrupt for 1 second? Some of that data was on the slides that were shown, and we've recorded this all so that those will be available afterward for consultation as well. But if you want to add briefly, anything more?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very hard to add briefly. I mean, meaning that I mean, we have so many case studies and it was so long and so big, let's say. But generally speaking, I mean, I can tell you that in the website, you can find most of the document. I mean, it's everything available, both the documents and some of the tools we developed. So if you want to navigate, for example, a bit more the actions that they developed, so what were they about, like this museum creation, for example, what it was about. And there are some publications about like more, let's say, outcomes and results. Generally speaking, like this methodology that we developed was very much into setting up these places for people to meet. So if you're working in the museum, I mean, the idea again was not, of course, to build new places. It was definitely, I mean, to reuse the existing one. In some cases, they recover existing buildings, but in other cases, they made, I mean, they built up on existing function, meaning, I mean, that in one case, for example, a museum is actually the Rural Heritage Hub. So it was the place where they started all of this discussion together with the stakeholders that they wanted to discuss with, because it was already a well-known place. So they didn't have to, like advocate to say, okay, we are setting up something, because they built on the existing. And this is definitely the first thing that I would suggest you. So, I mean, look around at what is already there in terms of, I mean, fertile environment, and it may be the same museum where you're working, and that start to focus on like 2-3 main entities or stakeholders that you would like to collaborate. And then, yeah, I mean, in the methodology, there are many steps that you can follow, but of course, I mean, you can choose like the simplest one. And there are also indications about budget, and then what I was mentioning at the end, like the fact that we managed to raise additional fundings. And I'm happy to have, I mean, a bilateral later when you want.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Claudia. We'll turn next to Louise Weir to talk to us about the FLIARA project, I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is, I know, live and ongoing at this time.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Claudia, for a great presentation. Unlike Claudia's project that it's finished, we're just starting. So it's from a different end, I guess we're doing it, but also, even though you've come to the end, I think we can see all the complexity of this. It's just not straightforward. And this idea that innovation happens, there is so many layers to it. And I suppose the FLIARA project, which is female-led innovation in agriculture and rural areas, is looking at this through the lens of women. And I think it comes with its own complexity. So all the things you've identified, Claudia, also has another layer when it comes from a female perspective. As I say, we're just starting. We just started in January. So how we're responding to today's theme is how we're going to approach, or where women are at within this innovation ecosystem, and how we think we can help unpack that. So this is part of Cluster 6 for communities under the topic of boosting led women innovation in farming and in rural areas. And here in Galway, we are the lead partner of this project. Like many projects, I guess it probably emerged from increasing challenges and demands in rural areas that we're all familiar with, and that there's a need now to look at innovation as part of that response to the challenges in rural areas. From a gender perspective, of course, we know that females have often been overshadowed, maybe even suppressed, where men in rural areas have dominated agriculture and rural entrepreneurship. And of course, there's a plethora of information showing that there are different barriers for women in terms of access to land, education, access to resources, capital, finance. So from that starting point, I can show you where FLIARA is working towards looking at the innovation ecosystem for women. So you can see from the map, we're 15 partners across 10 countries. We just started in January of this year. The first 6 months were primarily setting out our conceptual framework. How did we want to approach it? What angle we were taking? But what we wanted to do here is also how we think that innovation systems can contribute, what they can do. So they should spotlight. We know that women are doing this. This is nothing new that women are doing innovations. From everyone on this call knows that women are behind a lot of, especially the social innovations. So we need ecosystems to spotlight them, to show those achievements. Seeing is believing sometimes. Provide a source of inspiration and knowledge, to have those good practices, not even best practice. Sometimes we just need the good practice, and give those signposts of where women can get that information. Get key actors into the network spaces. Like Claudia mentioned there, your phrase was those places where innovation happen. That's where we need those networks and those actors. We need everybody in that space, not just the innovator or the entrepreneur, because it is an ecosystem. We need to heighten the visibility at all levels. When we talk about funding, as Claudia referenced, we need that discourse, we need that narrative at national and international level. And we need to increase that capacity, whether it's to apply for funding. We need to know at what stage and what level women are at. They will all be at different stages, so we need to be able to empower them at the stage at which they're at. So how are we going to contribute to this? Of course, with so many on this call, we all have a role to play. So for us, we're taking a transdisciplinary approach to the methods of this. We're using futures research and case study methods. So we're in building foresight approach, because we need to we're all transitioning into a more sustainable future with the European vision, long-term vision for rural areas. So what does the future innovations need? And where are women in that? So I think we need to couch what we talk about innovations, if we want them in that sustainable space, to be able to apply for those fundings. So our futures research is going to help us with that. We're also focusing on network building and policy benchmarking, like I just mentioned. So within this project, we've built in 4 community of practices, and I'll speak a little bit about that as we go through. And like all good projects, it is grounded in a conceptual framework, but our approach was to co-create this. With 15 partners, we have some academic, some practice. We all are value and women within this. So we need all the voice to create that conceptual framework. What does it look like? What can it look like? And how can we achieve it? And our project outcomes, of course, reduced to 3 sentences is not very ideal, but in 10 minutes, 3 is probably enough. We have to make policy proposals that are gender sensitive, that are gender proof, that have context. And we have practical tools to support women-led in innovation. So our starting point, sometimes you have to start at the beginning. And while we all know the general channels, as I mentioned earlier, through the lens of a female, this is very different. So some examples of the barriers or the obstacles are those conscious or unconscious biases that undermine women's possibilities. Those mindsets that, whether they are at policy level or at practice level, at the local level, they are barriers, sometimes visible, more often invisible. We have that lack of gender equality through parity of payment at the decision-making tables, whether it be in politics or local governance. And the other thing sometimes we must unpack, we must highlight, is that we need data, disaggregated data, which also acknowledges the heterogeneity of women. We are not one group. All of us here on this call, we're different ages, we have different life courses, we are at different stages within our lives. And our motivation for those innovations will be different depending on what time of life you meet us at. So when we've started mapping that through our conceptual framework and our knowledge review, then we can start looking at, well, where are the key points? Where are the flags, the signposts? Of course, there are women doing this. If we start identifying them, looking at where the leverage points are, where are the opportunities? If we look at where women have their excesses, what ecosystems are working and why are they working? How have barriers been removed previously? And what are the different contexts? So we're mapping that at the moment, and that's, I say, as we're working through. Not only because when we talk about this, we've built in our futures research, and we all need to be cognizant of this. To shift something for women, we also have to push and challenge where we can inform gender equality and rural sustainability going into the future. So just to add the complexity to our project, in addition to doing the innovation ecosystem, we also need to break down the barriers of future generations of women. And that means at policy level, we need gender equality at all levels. All women have diverse starting points and are embedded somewhere within the ecosystem, whether that be, you can see here, whether it be at the political system, influenced by sociocultural gender roles, values, or priorities. And each one of these could either be a barrier or an opportunity, depending on the context that you find yourself in. And I mentioned earlier, women have lots of different starting points. Going back to the places where Claudia mentioned, your reason for a motivation for starting an innovation, it might be because you need extra funding for a child going to college. It might be to supplement your husband's farming. It might be for your own livelihood, but the motivation will be different. And if you look on the outside of this, we've written in scaling up, scaling deep, scaling down. What we mean by that is we need to also think about where people are on their innovation. Is, for me, selling my home bread within my community enough, or do I want to sell it at a regional level? Do I want to go international markets? So our motivation is different depending on what we want to do with our business. And depending on where we're at, then we will require different resources. Do I need somebody to help me fill in the form to get funding? Or do I need someone with market research and legal acumen that can actually inform me to expand my business? We're looking at this in terms of the innovation journey. And then through our different approaches, whether it be futures or case studies, we're going to highlight pathways, unpack all of it to highlight different pathways that women can take depending on the context that they want to move forward with. Over the last 7 months, on the right-hand side of the screen here, you can see this lovely vision. I didn't create it. We have excellent partners in Finland and the University of Turku who are leading our futures research. And this is part of 7 months we've been working on this, going out on the ground. It's about planning and design and evaluation of alternative futures. We've used interviews, workshops, and focus groups where women can envision a future for farm and futures. I'm going to take a drink. Like your poor presenter this morning, was sick last week, so I'm just returning with a sore throat.
Oh.
So as we work through those, we have to try and get our community to think about 15 to 20 years ahead, which of course is quite difficult. It's very useful when we're very familiar with our own context. But over these 7 months, they've worked extremely hard to identify and unpack different types of innovation. It can be social, economic, environmental, cultural. So when we talk about sustainability, part of our project is to unpack different elements, the different dimensions of sustainability. So then we get a clearer picture of where the innovations are happening and maybe tag that to different funding streams. Down here in our little blue box is a post. So in the new year, we're going to do our 20 case studies, which will result in 200 interviews with women, face-to-face interviews with women across all these different types of dimensions of sustainability. So of course, we won't have hundreds and hundreds of different, but we do hope to capture the diversity of innovations that women are involved in. And that's what we need to spotlight within our innovation ecosystem. I mentioned these at the outset. This is part of our network building. We are running 4 community of practice events in 4 different countries, where 20 innovation ambassadors will be selected from our 200 interviewees, and they will participate in it. It's where we need to embed women within existing networks at the decision-making tables where they have a voice and they can be advocates for other innovators and also learn from each other. That transfer of knowledge is key. It's in those places that Claudia mentioned. It's also where we'll also bring together key stakeholders and policymakers, so they will work together in building policy proposals through participatory scenario building processes, and also have the opportunities for their voice to be heard and for their experiences. Also with these, we're going to have trainings and workshops for the women to build this FLIARA toolkit. So at the end, we do have a legacy of the project. So overall, where we're at, and still very enthusiastic because we're very early on, we have still loads of energy. We do want to respond to these challenges of rural areas that require innovation. It has to be part of the future map of rural areas where we actually take on innovation and move it forward. Improve the path for women-led innovation in agriculture, on farms and off farms. Again, it is one of those women in rural areas. Women, we have newcomers, we have diverse cultures, diverse societies. We need to be able to cater and give those opportunities to women. And for today, like these events, to collaborate with all of you, I have notes written everywhere and I've only listened to Claudia. These are so important for us to learn from each other, to get the lesson and say, well, that's a really good idea. I need to ask that in my next session. And to initiate change, of course, for improvements for women to become innovators and entrepreneurs in rural and farming areas. We're at the beginning of it and we're very enthusiastic to hear where the rest of the lessons come. So thank you, Nancy, and everyone for inviting us to take part in today's.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there any burning questions among our participants at this point? I really like how things are looping together, and I got a few ideas to come back to you about how to bring the voices of those that you were working with into those discussion forums where their voices can be heard and their stories can be heard. And we're also 1 year in, so we're just embarking on all of this.
Yeah.
Are there any questions at this? Okay, then we'll turn it next. Thank you again, to Milene, who actually I'm not sure exactly what you're going to be speaking about, but we know that there's also been some women gender-focused research that has turned up some interesting early results for us. So, Milene.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for the excellent previous presentation. I think I will mention also some results that we had for female participation in the cultural and creative occupations. And I will share my screen here. I will move a little bit okay, yes. Context of the presentations, because we are seeing some projects with some focus on specific regions. So now I will try to talk about the contributions of cultural and creative workers or cultural and creative occupations in non-urban regions, bringing a more broad view of non-urban regions in the European Union context. So this, as I mentioned before, it is a work that we are doing within the in situ project, and the in situ is project in progress. So we are also bringing more ideas to elaborate more reports on that. So an introduction here about this work that we already have done. In general, what we are seeing is that work is on geography of innovation, trying to explain the spatial concentration of innovation and the ways in which innovation supports regional development, but still with a stronger focus on urban regions or urban agglomerations, and also using patent data to explain those relations. However, to have a better view of non-urban regions and non-technological or soft innovation, we also have to pay attention on other forms of innovation. And here we are suggesting to looking at the trademarks as a complementary metric. So from one side, the patents are more often associated with technological innovations, which happens more frequently in high-tech sectors and are used mainly by large firms in core regions. But from the other side, trademarks represent more soft innovations. In this sense, they are more related to entrepreneurship activities, refer to commercialized products, and they can be relevant in all industries, not only high-tech industries. Also, trademarks are also particularly interesting as measure of innovation when we are interested in analyzing cultural and creative activities. First, because trademarks cover the more downstream phases of innovation process, those ones related to designing, product development, and market introduction. And these are the phases where creative workers are the key occupations. And the second, because trademarks have the potential to capture soft and non-technological innovation. Consequently, they offer an alternative for capturing innovation, rely on symbolic knowledge rather than technical knowledge. On one part of the literature, usually uses industrial classification to analyze cultural and creative industries. But we wanted to use another point of view, looking at occupations, and then identify the contributions of the workers to cultural and creative activities in the regions. There are a number of workers that also employ this approach, and they say that what matters most is what workers do, rather than where they work. For instance, although some industries are not considered creative in some classifications, some occupations within that industries actually are creative, and vice versa. Not every creative industries perform a creative worker perform a creative function. For example, in the shoe industries, shoe industry may not be considered a creative industry by the traditional classifications, but designers of new models are actually creative. While in any creative industries, we probably have accountants, for example, who are not creative occupations, but work in creative industries. So that's why we would like to focus on workers, not industries, to capture all these creative occupations. And also another central point of our work in the in situ project is the non-urban region. So innovation beyond the urban areas. This point is very important to highlight that there are other types of proximity that matters besides the geographical proximity and the urban agglomerations, the externalities of agglomeration. Actually, the innovative capacity of non-urban and peripheral regions is not a result of agglomeration, but of other types of proximity, especially cognitive and organizational proximity. For instance, social capital and community efforts foster innovation in those regions. So that's a fast explanation about our data here. We are employing data from the labor force survey, adopting the classification of Eurostat for the cultural and creative occupations. As for innovation, as I mentioned, we are using trademarks to analyze the innovation and also patents to compare the results. We are analyzing all the European Union, the 229 regions at NUTS 2, and we also divided these regions by urban, non-urban, and non-urban. We included the division by intermediate and the rural region. So we are trying to bring a picture of all the European Union. And we are analyzing the period from 2011 to 2019, stopping in 2019 to avoid to capture the pandemic effects on the labor market. So our idea here is that patent and the trademarks together provide a more complete picture of the regional innovation activities. So they needed to be evaluated together. I will now present some results, descriptive results. So first, we are seeing the table, the distribution of the CCO, the cultural and creative occupations across the European regions by degree of urbanization. We can see that around 5% of the workers in the European Union are employed in cultural and creative occupations, and there is no substantial difference among the regions. It is 4.8% in rural regions, and the highest value is found in intermediate regions with almost 5.7%. In the figure on the right is the distribution of the trademarks and the patents. And I want to call attention for rural regions. As we expected, they have more trademarks applications than patents. So this helps to explain why we should analyze other measures of innovation for different regional contexts, especially to provide insights for policymakers. Here we have a comparison between the total employment and the CCO by degree of urbanization, and also one point that intrigued us was find out more about the differences in relation to the gender of the workers. So what we can see in terms of total employment, the blue chart, is that female workers represent 47% of the total employment in the European Union. And this percentage is practically the same among the regions. On the other side, the green chart, in terms of CCO, female workers represent more than 61% of total CCOs in the European Union. And it is even more representative in rural areas, accounting for 65% of the CCOs, while it represents 57.6% in urban regions. So in this sense, the boosting of cultural and creative jobs is also associated with greater female participation in the labor market in non-urban areas, especially the rural regions. Here we can visualize a map with the distribution of these indicators across the European Union. It's interesting to note how the importance of the regions changes according to the indicator we are looking at. For instance, when we look at patents, the map in the bottom left, we see a greater concentration or stronger colors in a very few regions, essentially in the regions where Brussels, Paris, and Vienna are located, the most stronger. And when we look at trademarks, the map on the bottom right, we can see a more proportional distribution or a more color intensity more similar among all the regions. And we also see other regions standing out, such as regions in Italy, Portugal, Spain, for instance. And concerning to the share of CCOs and the female share of CCO, the two maps on the top, we note that apart from regions in Switzerland, some regions in Italy, Portugal, Greece, Iceland, and some Eastern European countries appears more stronger, with stronger indicators compared to other regions. So we can see how the map can change according to the indicator we are looking. And here we calculated a lot of tests, but for the sake of time, I will simplify things here and show a summary of the results. So just to remember, we seek to understand whether CCOs in a region are associated with the generation of innovation in terms of patents and trademarks. We calculated each model for urban, non-urban, and the rural regions to identify whether there is a difference in the results. In general, the answer is yes. We found a positive association between CCO participation in a region and an increase in the innovative activity. We can observe significant differences between urban and the rural regions, where in the latter, the contributions of CCOs on trademarks is more representative. In contrast, the boost on patent is more representative in urban regions. And when we look only at the rural regions, we see that this result is only significant for trademarks. So in rural regions, CCO can support innovation in the forms of trademarks. And also when we analyze the role of women in CCOs, it is interesting that it has the potential to stimulate innovation in a similar way in all regions, especially when we're looking at the trademarks. So trying to be fast here. So a brief conclusion here. In our work, the idea was to bring in some indicators to provide some insights for policymakers based on data, on the Eurostat data, the official data, to looking at non-urban regions in a different way when we try to analyze this and how to promote innovation in non-urban areas. So we can see that patents and trademarks, some measures of innovation, can provide a different map of regional innovation. The results also showed a stronger association between cultural and creative workers and the trademarks, especially in non-urban regions. So it's suggesting that using this metric might also help to mitigate we can also mitigate the gender bias when we analyze only patents. So we can direct policies in two ways, like to gender equality and also to non-urban regions. And when we can also say that policymakers should combine the patents and the trademarks as regional innovation indicators when monitoring socioeconomic contributions of CCOs at the regional level. And then finally, CCO proved to be key elements for innovation in non-urban regions. They could receive more attention for training and the regional policies to develop those specific types of regions. So that's all. Thank you very much. I hope I got my presentation on time.
Close, close. Okay, thank you. If you can, are there any burning questions out there at this point? Right, no, I see no shaky. Okay, Thank you, Milene. This is just one of the pieces of a variety of different types of research that are being activated within in situ, both qualitative and quantitative, as you saw, and different ways of thinking through innovation, how to mark innovation, and how it's typically monitored, I guess, at the European level. Everything from that to the processes involved in innovative projects that are going to be implemented to address local issues. And somehow we're going to weave that all together. But we felt that the gender dimension that you discovered in this research is really quite a leading idea to continue on with and combine with our other research. So thank you. We'll turn it over to Tim at this point for another quantitatively oriented research, and then turn to Rocio for, because something completely different. And onward. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just wait for the slides to come up. Okay, there we go.
This.
First, do over that. An apology in terms of, I'm going to have to recycle slides in here because, as many of you may know, there's a good chance the government is going to shut down in the US on November 17th. And so no non-essential, non-priority things can be sent through clearance at the time. So I've essentially put together a short presentation based on slides from a couple presentations previously. But this title slide does a very nice job of introducing what I'm going to be talking about. And that is essentially 3 points. The first is irrefutable, and that is design is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. The question about design is whether it is ad hoc or whether it proceeds through a structured creative process. The second point relates to innovation, and what I'll argue is the way that innovation has been studied predominantly, it ignores a critical part of innovation, and that is the role of imagination. And the third point I'll make is that design provides this really nice bridge between the non-rational imaginative part, which has been essentially ignored, and the rational value-adding part that most, at least economists, are interested in looking at innovation. And I'm going to provide some empirical evidence to suggest that there's value to looking at design and ways we think about promoting innovation, particularly in non-urban areas. So first of all, just some housekeeping and disclaimer. What I'm about to say should not be attributed to any of the institutions that contributed to this research. Okay, first, the irrefutable point. There's no such thing as an undesigned product. Design in it is ambiguous. It's part of the artificial, the artificial. Things are created by humans. Decisions have to be made. The question is whether those decisions are made in an ad hoc basis, which is actually how the majority of design happens, or if it's part of a structured creative process. And I'll argue that design can be this bridge between particularly the non-rational imaginative parts, which are also critically a part of art and creativity, and the rational value creation and innovation. And this whole idea is, it's not that these non-rational ideas are potentially valuable. It's that these non-rational ideas really can't be accessed by our rational thinking. And that is the reason that we have art and poetry and metaphor and all these other great things, is that we need these things to sort of tap into this critical input. So the hypothesis is that products that tap into rich non-rational inputs will be more innovative, more accessible, or more likely to delight and result in superior firm performance. And the evidence we're going to use for that is to look at faster employment or wage growth. So just to give you the impression that these ideas are not unique. John Dewey, one of the great minds of the 20th century, said that every great advance in science has issued from a new audacity of imagination. And, you know, we can contrast that with the dominant mode of thinking in economics, which relies exclusively on our prefrontal cortex, on rational thought. And anything outside of that is not admissible as evidence. And that results in not always the greatest insights on where innovative ideas come from. And, you know, to make these statements, I'm actually, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants, Edmund Phelps, William Baumol, and James March. And Phelps started, you know, he blames Schumpeter essentially for getting rid of the creative spark, this role of non-rational thought in innovation. And he describes these this process of mass flourishing, which happened up until about the mid part of the last century, in which creativity and finding unique solutions was a widely held activity. And perhaps the saddest quote from his book on this is that he said that wealth searches displace innovation searches. And so in being more concerned on, you know, can we afford to live in London or Paris or San Francisco, we're much more concerned with the money we're making from innovation rather than from the creative spark that promotes that innovation. Baumol, in his book, he talks about innovation as an entirely heterogeneous output, suggesting that the process of innovation is much closer to the process of art than it is to economics, in that non-obviousness is a critical part of, you're essentially looking for something unique. You're essentially looking for the combination of two ideas which would be silly to combine, but after you combine them, these supposedly, you know, unrelated ideas result in this new epiphany. And that is where innovation comes from. March provides sort of an excuse for economics, why they've been able to avoid this. And that if you think of this novelty generation, most new ideas are bad. The huge majority of new ideas are bad. So if you were to think of imagination only as this sort of abstract concept, you can argue that it's something that we can't study. All right. So it's, you know, if imagination is amorphous, then completeness may have to be sacrificed for empirical feasibility. What we're going to argue is that design provides an opportunity to look at this accessing the imagination and non-rational inputs in a structured creative process. So how do we do this? We borrow an idea from Statistics Denmark, which created this design ladder. And on the far right, you can see no systematic approach to design. This is essentially design as ad hoc. And as you can see, the variables are the variables we use to classify firms in either one of the categories. They don't spend any money or have any activities on in-house design. And in terms of intellectual property, there's very little activity there as well. Design last finish is the idea, I think, that most economists attribute to design, is that it's just the last little thing, it's styling you do before you introduce a product on the market. They have more expenses with respect to design activities, but again, their intellectual property is fairly limited. And then design integrated, these are firms that integrate the process of design throughout the product development process. And you can see they have design activities. Most importantly, their intellectual property activities are much higher. And, you know, consistent with the last presentation, we can see that the registration of trademarks is very high among design integrated firms. So, you know, what we want to ask, these data come from 2014. We're now in 2023. We could ask, how did these firms perform from 2014 to 2019 Did these design integrated firms actually do better than the firms that address design as a last finish or address design as ad hoc? And you can see here in this graph, in terms of describing what you see, the OLS is essentially the results at the mean. Tau equals 0.5 at the median. This 75 percentile is there, and tau at 0.9 is what we want to focus on. This is essentially examining what is the effect of design on the group of the fastest growing firms in our sample. And as you can see, design integrated firms essentially had an employment growth rate that was 1.5% higher than the fastest firms that did not have a design integrated, did not follow a design integrated strategy. And this also held true for, that was true for the whole sample. It also held true for the non-metro sample. So going forward, how to think about this? What's the relation of non-technological innovation to non-urban areas, specifically in terms of design? The first 2 points there are related to more research, that more research needs to be done, given the fact that design appears to be a critical part of the innovation process, but has been largely ignored in most economic analysis. It's the last 2 points that I think are more relevant in thinking about a ecosystem for innovation in rural areas, in that, in contrast to technological innovation, non-technological innovation, as you know, is the case with design, is much more footloose, and that what it would require, essentially, design thinking provides a toolkit for tapping into imagination, things like practices with respect to empathy or with respect to divergent thinking. This whole idea that artisanal tinkering is a contribution to innovation that often in the fast pace of designing in metro areas get short shrift. If rural areas are participating in what we call slow innovation, that artisanal tinkering can flourish. So in terms of thinking about it, if we go back to Schumpeterian innovation, which I would argue is something that has sort of taken over in our sort of venture capital rapid innovation model that we see in the global cities. In rural areas, we can think more in terms of slow innovation. We would describe something that is closer to doing innovation, that is innovation that is recognizes the value of non-rational input, recognizes the value of imagination and the creative input into creating products that are more relatable to humans in terms of technical innovation that can be made more accessible and more delightful. So with respect to that, I will thank you for this opportunity, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll ask you to, there we go. Thank you, Tim, so much for those additional thoughts, and to remind us of the importance of imagination and that creative spark that is often missed in these larger discussions of innovation processes and connections and everything. Are there any burning questions as the people are waiting to the end? Okay. Thank you very much. I won't keep us any longer. I'll turn it over to Racio for a different perspective on innovation.
Indeed. Let me just share the set of slides that I've prepared, and here we go. You should be seeing them, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
So just very quickly, I mean, since we already did the round, so I just had a few slides on MS, which, as I said, has been around for over 20 years now, and it's really involved in dialogues with other networks and communities, considering social enterprises and the social economy, social and solidarity economy, and the third sector as they're differently referred to across the world. We have been around for 20 years, and then I thought that I would bring in, the thesis that was the PhD thesis that I, that was finally published by Routledge after receiving the NCAT Award for Cultural Policy. And I mean, why I'm bringing this is not just to sell the book, but really to share this idea that, how we define, and actually many of the things that you have been saying, the way in which we define what innovation is, and what Tim was saying, the Schumpeterian focus that we have had. I think that, of course, it has then defined how we have measured, and therefore how we have funded, and the kind of policies that have been developed to support innovation, which has overlooked obviously those that were in the outskirts, like rural innovation. So my goal for today, I have 10 minutes, and I'm going to try and stick to it. So it's going to be very fast. Most of what I'm going to present, it's already published, it's available on our website. So my idea is really to share with you why this idea of social enterprise, and why we think it's a good vehicle to talk about many of the things that we are talking, particularly in rural areas, having to do with creative industries or culture and the arts, how we prefer to relate to this area of research, and then how we connect these three areas: social enterprises, culture and the arts, and rural areas, or the rural. So very quickly, what we consider as social innovations are organizational arrangements or organizations that combine three things. One is a defined social mission that reverts on the general interest. So we are, talking, for instance, when we speak about cooperatives, of course they can be part of social enterprises. But the idea is that they expand the benefit or the results, the social mission of the organization, that they make it wider so as to benefit community over time. And something that I do want to add here as well is the relevance that the environmental dimension is getting now. I mean, and this is something that we're seeing in all of our studies. The second one has to do with the economic model. There has to be an economic model sustained over time, but we will see that this economic model speaks of a variety of resources, and also the idea of a governance structure that is participated or democratic. Something that is very important from the mappings and the ecosystems studies that we have done is that in most cases in Europe, and we're talking particularly about the ecosystem studies in Europe, is that the majority of social enterprises in Europe are created by citizens. And I think that this is really, really important. We're talking about a collective of citizens that are leading them. And then, some other strategies for creating social enterprises, which are NPOs or non-profit organizations, marketization, which is a little bit developing the earned income side of NPOs, and then the public sector restructuring that comes more from the CE countries. Just very quickly, again, usually it's very useful as well, because you see we speak a lot about innovation, but I think that when we talk about social enterprises, it's good to keep in mind that there are different school of thoughts, we call them. So the main one, the continental European one, if you want, is this social economy school of thought. That's a little bit the one that we have developed over time. But then, as I was saying, we have been in dialogue and incorporating and having a conversation with many of the researchers applying this earned income school of thought, and then the social innovation school of thoughts, that it's all about this, recombination of existing ideas and the assessment of available resources with new lenses. For us, and I think this is very, important to understand where we're coming from, we usually think of social enterprises as a bridging concept. And why is this? Because what we began observing 20 years ago was that there was a new way of doing things from citizens, from what it's usually called the social economy, again, the third sector, however you call it in different countries. But in this sense, there was like a convergence between the cooperatives, as I was saying, that sort of became more oriented towards the interest, the collective interest, and the non-profit organizations that became more how would I say, more concerned about their economic or financial sustainability, but not only. Economic sustainability also means more autonomy and independence. So I think, and in that sense, for us, social enterprises means that bridging concept that came through, or that like a trend that is coming through many of the areas of collective citizenship, economic, or civil society, organized civil society economic activities. These I will go very quickly again, but I think it's very useful to see, you know, that in the three economic logics or dynamics that Karl Polanyi identified, that was the market system of economic logic, redistribution, and reciprocity. Actually, and they are usually embodied by, you know, private companies in the sense of the market. The state is the redistribution agent, and then reciprocity, which is the logic that Polanyi explained, you know, following also the French sociologist Mauss, you know, the idea of how we reassign and redistribute resources based on mutual help and self-help. So, you know, when you cross all these different logics, and then, you know, differences between the public and the private, not for profit and for profit, informal and non-informal, for many years, what we try to, you know, to explain and to convey to people is that social enterprises are in this crossroads already. So they occupy a space, an institutional space, an economic space that combines many logics and many actors. So I won't stop here, of course, but it's just for you to know that for many years we have been studying also the genealogy, you know, what has been the story, what has been the institutional evolution of the notion of social enterprises and the practice of social enterprises across international areas, not only in Europe, but also around the world. For that, we did two major research with the European Commission, these ecosystems of social enterprises in Europe, and then internationally, ICSEM, which was a project that covered 50 countries. And here's the ecosystem that we have mapped and you know, that we have studied and documented throughout Europe. When we talk about social enterprise ecosystems, we talk about these areas, these four areas: the capacity to self-organize, the visibility and recognition, resources, and research, education, and skill development. For this, what I would do is to encourage you, to invite you to go to the European Commission. I can share it with you later. There's a European comparative report that I think actually provides a good overview of this. And 5 minutes into a presentation, I'm in the middle. So,
Okay.
When we, you know, why are we here, and why would we, you know, our research, the questions that we continue to ask, be relevant? Well, you know, we have come to the conclusion that, you know, we are living a number of chained crises that are actually putting us against what some people have called the unpostponable transitions. And then very, very interestingly, and that was part of the PhD, you know, the PhD work, and then after, you know, the cultural sector has been for a long time like an epitome of the context where we find ourselves, you know, the job precariousness, the intermittency, the commodification or intensive mercantilization. So, you know, that was a little bit the status, you know, or the stage where culture had been, particularly regarding to workers. And what we have seen in the last years, particularly in the last 15 or 10 years, has been an upsurge of experiences, many of them within the field of culture, that do bring a very intensive transformative aim, and many of them do address specifically in their mission and in their programmatic strategies, transition issues. And this is where we speak of the wider ecosystem of the social and solidarity economy that also speaks of proximity. And in that sense, I also loved what was said before about this different notion of proximity, that I think it's very, very interesting. And so in this research, in exploring, what is happening in different areas, what we have seen also is that, from what some people are saying, and Tim was also saying, this capital venture context that we live in, well, this is like an intensive encirclement or privatization of some of our areas, and culture has been one of them. Actually, it was one of the epitones, right? Budget cuts and privatization of culture. Well, I think that not me, I mean, we are seeing that there's a comeback of the commons, the idea of culture as a new common, which means actually that there's also a lot to learn from what we already knew. And I think that in that sense, also when we talk about rural communities and rural areas, I think that in many cases there is the possibility of connecting with many of the things that we already knew as communities, and finding popular culture and collective solutions as a way forward. I mean, this is how we move forward against this look of concentrated or oligarchic interests. And then the other thing I think, and this is really, really interesting, is to actually look at the history of communitarian political thought, but also communitarism. I think that we can look at the history of human beings here on Earth from the perspective of the commons, and I think that it's actually very surprising to see how this idea of self-organization, this idea that actually questions many of the things that on which our practice and thinking, our current practice and thinking are based, actually fall down. So these foundational dogmas, I think, are now being put on question. This is actually one of the cooperatives. It's actually based in Europe, in Italy, in Trentino Alto Adige. It's Milene, and they do a lot of things that you were saying before, Claudia, as well, of the 6 areas in your project. Very quickly, what we have also seen, and this is some work that was done in France for a long time, is that these cultural and arts or artistic social enterprises do characterize themselves like, or share characteristics with other social enterprises. Of course, they are multi-goal, they are multi-activity and multi-stakeholders, but they have many specific things that make them unique agents in their communities. They are very concerned with articulating plural voices in the public space. They collaborate and cooperate, and usually replication, it's not based on competition or in growing, but it's really based on support to new initiatives and adapting initiatives to new environments. This is another one, all social enterprises share this, is this idea of mobilizing different types of resources. They implement a participatory and democratic governance. They are usually small and medium enterprises and mobilize workers and volunteers in many cases that are competential. And then also the innovation, and I think that this is very interesting, particularly in the field that we are talking about. I think that the notion of innovation, it's actually based on experimentation, but an experimentation that does not rely on the individual will or even vision of one individual person, which can drive it, but it's really based on agreed values by the community or by the stakeholders of within a given social enterprise. And then lastly, they are embedded. Usually these type of enterprises, and particularly in non-urban areas, they are embedded in the territories, and what they do is that they're able to activate many local actors and institutions. So this is also some research that I did recently, that was last year, and something beautiful that is appearing. It was 2 cases in Galicia and in Andalusia, rural areas here in Spain. And the question was, how are they resignifying themselves? How are they becoming agents of resignification of the rural and the contemporary through their organizations? And we focused on analyzing the references that they were using, the values and the practices. And many of the things that we see here, it's, they also feed the former slides. But I think that when we talk about references, there is a pride of belonging, you know, in these cases, and the stakeholders around, there's a pride of belonging to the territory. There's also an increasing resignification of the inhabitants. You know, people are assuming and being empowered to assume new roles as new agents of these CASes or these social enterprises, and they are very aware and connected to the outside, but local references are consolidating when it comes to culture and the arts. And I think that that was very important and continues to be very important in many of the cases that we see. The values, it's really this idea of communitarism, so the idea of the commons. It's very quickly, you know, people without even knowing the idea or the framework of the commons, they talk about it. This idea of critical thinking, I think that this is also something that was very striking for me. And in terms of thinking about innovation, we have to think that people in the rural communities and people carrying through culture and the art projects and initiatives are very critical from a cultural and thought standpoint. And then this was also very interesting, the idea that territories are not just a background, which is something, you know, very urbanocentric perspective. Territories are main protagonists. I mean, it's almost like they were sitting in the table, you know. And this idea, you know, with practices, this idea of community culture, proximity culture, the idea of closing circles, you know, just like in nature, that whatever you do with culture and the arts has to close itself and has to be, you know, something that comes back positively into the life of the communities. And this idea of artistic experimentation, that it's not, as I said, based on the idea of genius or anything like that, but it's really based on the idea of negotiation and consensus in a community. And, you know, I will leave it there. There's just, I know I'm way beyond, but, you know, I'm so happy because, you know, some of the things that we found that we continue to study actually connect very much to what many of you are saying. This idea of women as key facilitators and key references as well, actually very interesting. And then this idea of the connection of multiple transitions. I mean, I personally, it's something that I have been working a lot on lately. And the idea that it's not just food transition, energy transition, you know, cultural, political transition. No, they all really have to be connected. And culture, because of the symbolic power that it has, it's actually has a huge potential to connecting these transitions. So this is just something as a study that I can share with you later. This is a study on social enterprises in Ireland that came out. You know, and for me, and this relates also with something that I was saying before, I think it's really interesting that, you know, when we talk about rich activities of heritage festivals, arts and creative industry, social enterprises, look at this. I mean, they have a reach, you know, of course they focus on the local reach, but they also have a county, so like a regional one, also a national and an international. I mean, this is something that really, really sets us apart, you know, from the rest of sectors in Ireland. But I suspect that if we could do the same exercise in other countries, it would probably be the same. And here, this is just an example of how women are actually, this is actually gender distribution according to the sector of activity in the creative industries. And, you know, the rest of the title, women are a majority. But then, of course, when you go to board members, actually the representation is the other way around. So, you know, we continue to see this, which is something that I'm sure doesn't surprise any of us. But, you know, I found that it was very interesting and worth mentioning. And that's it. I will leave it there with, you know, a composition. There was a poetry composition that we did together with one of the studies, because that's the last thing. I think that when we go on to the rural, knowing that, I mean, I myself, I live half in the city and half in the countryside. I think that even the tools that we carry, the analytical tools, the lenses that we carry, in many cases are biased and do carry an urban-centric look. So in my case, this last research that I did was based on social poetics methodology, but there are many other participatory action research that I think would help us unearth a lot of things that could really be enlightening for all of us. So thank you so much. Sorry if I went over the time. Happy to take questions.
Wow. Thank you very much. Yeah, inspiring, very dense presentation. So I'm very happy that that everything is recorded, and to let everyone know that, so we can replay all of these presentations. And really, we will be developing, just to say, some short notes. We definitely won't cover all of the many inputs that everyone's made, but we'll be creating a succinct kind of overview of some key points that resonate with us. And then once we re-listen, we'll see the connections more clearly. But are there any questions for Rocio or for any of the presenters, or any other comments and reflections in general that anyone has, including the other presenters at this point? Oh, what a quiet group. Must be the time of year.
Nancy, we have a question on the question and answers of Isabel Albergaria, and she was asking, could you explain in what sense the RURITAGE is going to last after the end of the project? How it's going to be alive when the whole structure finishes from a formal point of view? This can be, for example, our first question.
Okay.
I suppose I'll take it.
Claudia. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we very much reason at the end of the project. Like, you know, that, I mean, it's kind of compulsory in this European project to think about sustainability and exploitation, no, of project results. And to us, the main thing we wanted to keep doing was somehow to stay in contact and to work together and keep being somehow an entity. There was a huge discussion about, I mean, formally establishing an entity. That at the very end, I mean, we didn't so far. I say so far because, I mean, this is still under discussion for basically, I would say, I mean, legal and financial somehow barriers that we encountered. Being a university, we have many issues, for example, in entering as a member of a network, of a consortium. We need to require like the high level, no, let's say, directorate agreement. So, I mean, it was not easy. But nevertheless, the network is informally, let's say, set. We have a new website that is the network website that still, of course, communicates with the old website, but it's something that we are keeping update. There was, let's say, a huge engagement from our side, from the coordinator's side, to invest in this part of communication. So we are actually, I mean, we took over like the responsibility over the creation of this new website, and we also took over the responsibility of the organization of bi-monthly meeting, meaning that we still meet once every 2 months. Of course, I mean, it's not as when the project is running that you meet basically weekly, but still there are like different streams, let's say, that we still work on that regards both communication and dissemination. So we are speaking with the case studies to understand where they are, what they're doing with their like upgraded actions, let's say. There is quite much about the research still going on. You know that, I mean, us as a research institution, we have to publish scientific paper. And in that case, we are still doing that. So we are still reworking together with the other partners about some of the results that we got. The most interesting results came out at the very end. I think that's normal for every project. And you really don't have the time now to process and to publish around them where the project is still on. So again, it's another activity that we are doing now. And we are still thinking, this is something that, I mean, we still don't know exactly, but we are still thinking about maybe making a conference next year about, I mean, again, rural regeneration as a whole in the somehow frame of RURITAGE. Then, of course, I mean, we got this new project entering. So, I mean, now it's a bit, I mean, we have really to decide where to invest because it's quite much work, as you can imagine, all those partners. But yeah, still we are trying. I mean, it's a tentative and it's going fine. I mean, of course, it's much harder to push partners to contribute because you don't have, I mean, agreement signed anymore in terms of grant agreement. Nevertheless, we do have like informal partnerships established. So, I mean, we did sign a collaboration agreement at the end of the project. So yeah, it was a way to keep somehow we wanted to keep work together somehow. So yeah, that's a bit the point. And you can definitely, I mean, you can see on the internet, there are two websites. So there is the RURITAGE project and the RURITAGE network. And the RURITAGE network is the follow-up somehow.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Any other question that you want to put to our speakers, or?
I have a question. First, Tim.
Yeah.
Just some thoughts about, there are a number of times that climate change and global warming was brought up, and the whole issue of why our current models of innovation are so incapable of addressing that, and that, venture capital is looking for a quick way to get a cash out. And all of these problems that we're struggling with are exactly the opposite, that you have to interact with the environment. The territory, as was said, is a critical player in all of this. And you also need deep knowledge of what is happening on the territory. And so the example, last year I was in Canada on an OECD mission looking at rural innovation, and we were in Fogo Island. And the fact that community there, which, essentially was going to be driven to extinction by the disappearance of the cod fisheries, they essentially got together and said, well, no, we're going as a community, get together and figure this out. And so the innovations that they're introducing into their fishery is essentially based on a very deep knowledge of the ecology of what they're dealing with. And so this slow, deep innovation for sustainability, I think, is the way forward, rather than a fast cash out way to towards innovation, which venture capital seems to be so obsessed with.
Thank you. Fiona, turn it over to you.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentations. Just to say, I'm not in the in situ project, so I'm not really, in the innovation area, but I found the FLIARA project really interesting. And thanks so much, Louise, for presenting it. Coming from a background of tourism and gender, and labor anyway, in tourism and gender, and how the gender roles affect that, and also living in a very rural area myself, and being a lecturer and researcher, I wondered if, because I quickly had a look on your on the project website, if you are noticing that there is maybe a shift, like, if there are lots of neo-rurals moving, people like who used to live in the urban environment and are moving into the rural environments amongst the women that you are researching there. So, going further than, like, say, the typical thing which you imagine in a rural area, which would be like a farmer or, somebody who works the land or something like that. So I don't know if you had any observations on that. Thank you.
Hi, Fiona. Thank you for having a little peek. Please do keep an eye on us. We haven't gone out to the women yet, but this is one of the things that we have found in our other Horizon projects, is that we do have newcomers into our communities, and that diversity we do want to capture. And we do know that they bring, especially in this context of cultural, there are so many innovations within the community from people that are not originally from, whether we call them new entrants or newcomers that come into the communities, that we will engage in those 200 interviews. And that's why we specifically have 10 case studies in farming and 10 case studies that are not in farming. But yes, we are noting them, and we do expect that we capture that. As I say, of course, we can't say they're going to be representative, but we do want it to be reflective of what is within the communities. So we do want to capture that. While I'm still on, I also wanted to note, if that's okay, Nancy, I was going to say, just across our presentations, I think it's important to note as well, especially when we're thinking of a wider context, when we think of rural. When we say non-urban, I think we also need to think that rural is not a homogeneous area, and that especially in ours, and I know in other projects, we are looking at different rural typologies, because depending on your context, whether you live close to the city, whether you live in a village or very remote rural area, that will determine what type of innovation you have because of your context, whether you're using your natural resources, your different culture from different areas. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And the other thing I really enjoyed across the presentations was our different, not perspectives, but our different awareness of different innovations. And I think we also need to think about that in terms of policy context or what we want from policy. They're also cross-cutting. So we can say we want social support for the social enterprises. We need economic for the other, but the other part of this is the innovation journey. And I really loved the synopsis of Timothy, where this design part of innovation, we're calling this our innovation journey, where someone just has the idea. How do you get that person with the idea onto the next ladder, the next rung of the ladder? So from the diversity of presentations, I really enjoyed it. But I think as we all move forward, just to try and keep that narrative front and foremost, is what do we want from the policy? What support do we actually want, and where do we need it? And how can we do that best together? So again, the synergies today are tremendous, and we'll meet again, hopefully. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Louise. There was also Dimitri wanted to make a question.
Yeah, yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hi, Dimitri.
Hi, hello everyone. Nice to see you
As
all.
we have, Dimitris, as we have a short time, can be really objective.
Yeah. Sorry, that was great. No, it was more of a practical question than I just wanted to ask, are these presentations going to be uploaded somewhere? Because I would love to read more on the literature and the references.
We will be we'll be putting the recording of the presentations, including the slides, onto the In Situ website, and also developing not a fully comprehensive, but a brief sort of a snapshot overview of some of the key resonating points. At this point, I don't think we've asked the presenters to provide their individual presentations, but it'll be as part of the video, if that helps.
Great, that's great. Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you. Do we have time for one more question? I have one.
If one more question. Oh, one more.
It's a question that I would like to place. If
okay.
No one, someone is wanting to make any other question?
Oh, I thought you had one, Lorena. No? Okay.
No more from the public. No more.
I have one short question for our presenters then, just to help us with the note-taking. The question of the seminar or of the webinar was, how can CCI innovation ecosystems, or the development of innovation ecosystems, particularly with a consciousness to cultural and creative work, be fostered in non-urban areas? And if each of you could say top 2 or 3 words or phrases or topics that come to mind. It's like a really rapid round table. We won't hold you to it forever, but are there any, after listening to all of the diverse, or anybody else that would like to contribute, sort of the key factors that you think are really important to kind of have in there if you're building ecosystems among cultural and creative workers, to encourage them, to enable them to work, but also perhaps advance innovation in their work. Complete silence. That's okay.
Begin. Come on, team.
I'll start. Yeah, I would just say, because I do think that design is incredibly footloose in terms of thinking about design as a cultured, as a structured creative process. Some workshops on design thinking, just the process you go through in terms of starting with more divergent thinking. And because I think many of our sort of instincts are more convergent, right? we want to get to agreement, whereas often the most innovative solutions start by taking, well, what's a totally different way to think about a problem? And I think there are a lot, potential for a lot of interesting innovations to come out of that approach. So that would be my one suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Just connecting to that, I could say, I'm just going to mention some that I've written, Nancy. So enabling collectively designed, implemented, and evaluated initiatives, promoting economic plurality, learning or allowing for a more commons approach or communitarian approach, doing more participatory action research, and community culture. Those would be my.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My idea was like the same. I think it's like we have to keep tracking the local capacity, because it's much more easier when we know better the regions to talk about them. So we cannot make only generical propose solutions for the region. So I think I would say to keep tracking the regions, analyze the local capacity, and also based a little bit in the presentations, also looking at the indicators of regions, because one region can be more active in some type of in cultural industries, another in creative industries. So the type of occupation also changes. So the type of policy that these regions will need also will change.
Heterogeneity. Anyone else?
Yeah, of course, I agree with all those that have been the same put forward. We probably have a lot of mindsets the same. I think the other thing we could do with for the cultural specifically is to unpack it a little bit further. If you think of culture from Ireland, someone's going to say we're going to be playing music. Timothy mentioned, or somebody mentioned, the environment earlier. So how do we tap into the other dimensions of sustainability? Like culture could be using your knowledge base of your assets within your region. Culture can be working with what you have there. As Timothy suggested, thinking outside the box. So it's unpacking those, almost like the typical language that we use around them. It can be inhibiting. So if we can unpack that as researchers within the communities, well, what is it that you consider it? I think that would be an important thing. And another important aspect would be engaging the youth. I think we need to engage youth in all of these dialogues and these narratives of, in 15, 20 years' time, we may be heading toward a nice retirement. Hopefully we'll all still be there, but they're the future. So I think engaging the youth is an important part of this, and also because it does orbit in a sphere that we don't add this metric, economic value to it. And I think we need to link that to policymakers to say, well, and I saw in Milene's presentation, we can see how that contributes to value, and sometimes we have to put numbers on it, but we don't have the right metrics at the moment for that. So creating some kind of framework around that where we can say, this is the value of how it does it. And that can be a social value, whether it is about, as was it Fiona mentioned a moment ago, those newcomers, how do we attract those to the rural areas? Like that is a value. We're keeping community, and we are regenerating our communities with people. So it is about thinking of all the extra values that wouldn't ordinarily have an economic metric.
Thank you.
I can very fast close, maybe. I think yeah, the last one. No, I mean, I'm very much agreeing, and I wanted to raise the idea of the target. So I mean, thanks, Louise, for mentioning young. We always said, and I think it's something that we are keeping very much working on, that one of the main issues of rural areas is the narrative of rural itself. I mean, when we speak about rural, most of the time we describe them as places that are missing something. No, I mean, there's few population, there's few transport, few services. We are missing this and that, and somehow we always wanted to, let's say, move this narrative around. So to describe them as rich places of actually basically cultural and natural capitals. Meaning that, I mean, if we look back at heritage itself, so in terms of cultural tradition or culture as like even natural heritage, these are the places where, I mean, they're really the cradle of our society. And if we are able to transmit this to the people that are living there, so to build trust for them in what they have, I mean, then the process will somehow follow in terms of what they can then create themselves and innovate themselves. So I mean, it's very much also a trust building and a reverse narrative, maybe.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts from anyone? Of things that may not have been brought up? That's okay. That's okay. I'd like to thank everyone for all of your contributions and all your thoughtfulness and all the ongoing work that's happening, which is really inspiring in all its different facets. And I do believe there's a lot to interconnect on going further, and probably in less public fora for now, but we're also looking for other opportunities to connect with the different projects and initiatives over time, and anyone else who's participating who would like to continue to be in touch with our project and with what other initiatives may be coming up. I encourage you to join the In Situ newsletter. That's the best way. Just go to insituculture.eu. At the bottom, there's a please put your email in, and you can join our mailing list. And then and for everyone, you can also email us at insitu@ces.uc.pt, which you can send emails at any time to get a hold of us. Again, I'd like to thank all of our participants, the European Commission for their support of the In Situ project and of many of the other projects you've heard here today, which now enables these kind of initiatives and experiments to go forward to help hopefully co-develop a new world and new ways of thinking forward. And you mentioned conference, so I have to say that In Situ will be organizing a conference next September, sometime in the last 2 weeks, in Croatia with one of our partner organizations, the Cultura Nova Foundation. So perhaps we can chat about sessions and things and collect efforts together. And I think that's all I have to say, other than thank you again. And our next webinar is on, just a minute, so December the 5th, I think at the same time. We've moved it to the afternoon because we had a number of questions from North America of people that couldn't participate in when we put it earlier in the day. And the question of the session number 3 will be, how does cultural and creative work contribute to place-based sustainability and resiliency? So moving outward just a little bit more, and hopefully also revisiting and deepening some of the conversations we're having already. So I'll let you go now and bring this to a close, but thank you again for all of your time and energies and contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Lovely to meet you all.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.